Especially with something like Deep Purple in rock, I thought was warranted. Child in Time, and there's a few other tracks on the Highway Star.
For decades, Ritchie Blackmore has been one of rock's most mysterious legends. A man whose guitar could sing, snarl, and scream all in the same breath. As the driving force behind Deep Purple and Rainbow, he reshaped the sound of hard rock, blending classical precision with raw, unrestrained power. Songs like Smoke on the Water, Highway Star, and Man on the Silver Mountain didn't just define a generation. They defined the electric guitar itself. But while his riffs became immortal, Ritchie himself became something of an enigma. Known for his perfectionism and temper, he was never one to chase fame or follow trends. He shunned the spotlight, rarely gave interviews, and preferred to let his music speak for him. Yet behind that quiet intensity, there was a deep respect, even love, for the music that inspired him to pick up a guitar in the first place. Now, at 80 years old, the guitar god has finally broken his silence. In a rare and deeply personal reflection, Ritchie Blackmore revealed the 10 rock albums that shaped his soul, the ones that pushed him to experiment, to rebel, and to reach for something greater than sound itself. And what makes the list truly fascinating isn't just who's on it, but who isn't. From blues icons to psychedelic visionaries, from unsung geniuses to unexpected modern influences, each album reveals a side of Ritchie few have ever seen. This isn't just a list. It's a window into the mind of one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived, and the music that built the legend. Before he became one of the most influential guitarists in rock history, Ritchie Blackmore was just a shy English boy growing up in the post-war streets of Weston-super-Mare. His fascination with sound began early, long before fame, long before Deep Purple. As a teenager in the late 1950s, he was obsessed with the strange new noise coming from America, rock and roll. But while other kids were chasing Elvis, Ritchie's ear gravitated towards something different, the guitarists behind the stars, the ones who could make a single note cut through the air like lightning. He often said the first album that truly changed his life was The Shadows' Greatest Hits by The Shadows. Lead guitarist Hank Marvin was Ritchie's first true idol. He had that tone, Blackmore recalled. Clean, precise, emotional. It was beautiful. I spent years trying to get that sound. He would sit in his bedroom for hours, learning every bend, every slide, every echo of Marvin's iconic red Fender Stratocaster. That record didn't just inspire him. It became his musical foundation. The next revelation came from Buddy Holly and the Crickets, the Chirping Crickets. While not a guitar showcase by today's standards, it was the first time Ritchie understood how rhythm, melody, and storytelling could live inside a rock song. Holly's blend of innocence and rebellion left a deep impression on him. It wasn't about how fast you played, Ritchie once said. It was about how much you meant it. As the 1960s arrived, London's underground music scene began to explode. Blackmore started working as a session guitarist, learning discipline and perfectionism in the studio. But one record pushed him to break out of that clean-cut world, Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton by John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. The sound of Clapton's Les Paul through a cranked Marshall amp changed everything. That tone, Ritchie said, it had attitude. It was British blues with teeth. For the first time, he realized the guitar could be violent, not just melodic. It could command attention. That raw, blues-driven aggression would later bleed into Deep Purple's earliest riffs. But Blackmore's taste was never limited to the blues. Around the same time, he discovered A Hard Day's Night by the Beatles, a record he admitted to both admiring and resenting. They wrote perfect songs, he said, but what frustrated me was how simple it seemed. Everyone loved them. I wanted to do something that demanded more from the listener. Still, he couldn't deny the power of their melodies and the way they changed pop music forever. Then came the album that cracked open a door to something more dramatic. Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. The first time Ritchie heard Purple Haze, he stopped playing for a week. It was like hearing the future, he said. I thought, there's no point in continuing. He's done everything I wanted to do. Yet, instead of giving up, he used Hendrix as fuel. Ritchie studied how Jimmy controlled feedback, how he made chaos sound beautiful. From that came the fierce experimentation that defined Deep Purple's early years. But the record that truly transformed him, the one that made him realize rock could be art, was Disraeli Gears by Cream. With Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker, Ritchie heard something bold. Musicians stretching beyond form, improvising like jazz players within a rock framework. That's when I understood what freedom in music really meant, he said. By the time the late 60s rolled around, Ritchie Blackmore had absorbed everything: the clarity of the Shadows, the soul of Buddy Holly, the blues fire of Clapton, the imagination of Hendrix, and the musical risk-taking of Cream. When he co-founded Deep Purple in 1968, he carried all those influences like secret weapons. The world saw a dark, moody guitarist whose riffs could shake stadiums. But behind those riffs were the echoes of every record that had ever moved him. Each note of Hush and Mandrake Root carried pieces of those early albums, the blueprint of a sound that would define generations. And yet, even as his fame skyrocketed, Ritchie's love affair with music didn't stop there. Because in the years that followed, new albums, darker, heavier, and far more ambitious, would challenge even his own definition of greatness. By the early 1970s, Ritchie Blackmore had become a force of nature. Deep Purple wasn't just another rock band. They were redefining what heavy music could sound like. The guitar, once a supporting instrument, was now the weapon leading the charge. Yet even as millions of fans worshipped his riffs, Ritchie still saw himself as a student, always searching, always listening. And the albums that inspired him during this era reveal the restless mind behind the legend. One of the first that struck him deeply was Led Zeppelin II. While Ritchie and Jimmy Page were often compared, and even rumored to have a quiet rivalry, Blackmore admitted that this album changed his perspective on rock production. That record had weight, he said. It sounded alive. Bonham's drumming, Page's riffs. It wasn't clean, it was human. He loved how the album blended blues roots with mystical energy. It wasn't about playing faster, Ritchie reflected. It was about playing deeper. Then came an unexpected source of inspiration: Paranoid by Black Sabbath. While Ritchie never tried to emulate Tony Iommi's dark, sludgy style, he respected its simplicity and rawness. He found the power in minimalism, Blackmore said. I tended to fill space. Tony showed me that sometimes one note, played right, can shake the earth. That lesson echoed in Smoke on the Water, a riff so simple yet so immortal that it became the heartbeat of hard rock itself. But Ritchie's influences weren't limited to British metal. Around this time, he became captivated by In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. It was unlike anything he'd ever heard. The combination of rock aggression and classical sophistication spoke directly to his soul. That record proved rock could be intelligent, he said. It wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was composition, dynamics, control. You can hear that influence in the way Ritchie structured songs like Child in Time. Slow, haunting builds exploding into fury, just like a symphony. Another record that struck him during Deep Purple's peak was Abbey Road by the Beatles. While he had once been skeptical of their mainstream appeal, the sheer craftsmanship of that album humbled him. George Harrison's tone and phrasing on Something, that's perfection, Ritchie once admitted. He didn't need 10 notes to say what one could express. It reminded Blackmore that melody mattered just as much as muscle. As Deep Purple evolved into their classic Mark II lineup, Ritchie also found inspiration from Jeff Beck's Truth. Jeff was the only guitarist I truly feared, he confessed. He didn't play notes, he spoke through the guitar. The rawness, the spontaneity, the emotional control, it all pushed Ritchie to dig deeper into expression rather than mere technique. When you hear Jeff bend a note, he said, you remember that music isn't math. It's conversation. But perhaps the most unexpected album to influence Ritchie's mid-career sound was Aqualung by Jethro Tull. It was the combination of folk, classical, and rock that fascinated me, he recalled. It showed that heavy music could also be beautiful. That idea planted the first seed for what would later become his band Rainbow, where he would fuse medieval melodies with electric fire. By the mid-1970s, Ritchie's curiosity was turning toward deeper, darker textures. When he heard Machine Head, the very album he himself recorded with Deep Purple, he recognized something special. "I don't usually praise my own work," he said with a grin, "but that one, we captured lightning." It was the culmination of every album that had ever influenced him. The precision of the Shadows, the rebellion of Zeppelin, the weight of Sabbath, and the elegance of King Crimson. Still, fame came with frustration. The bigger Deep Purple got, the more Ritchie felt confined by their formula. "It was becoming predictable," he once said. "I wanted to explore, not just play louder." During that restless period, he found inspiration in another timeless album, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. It wasn't about guitar heroics, he admired. It was about atmosphere. Ever moved him the way those classics did. They weren't perfect, he said, but they were alive. Every mistake, every breath, it mattered. The man known for his precision had finally learned to appreciate imperfection, the humanity behind the notes. By the time Ritchie Blackmore left Deep Purple in the mid-1970s, he wasn't just walking away from a band, and he was walking toward his true artistic identity. He had conquered hard rock. He had created riffs that would live forever. But inside him, there was a different sound, one that blended medieval melody, classical precision, and emotional storytelling. The albums that shaped this era of his life revealed the depth behind the man often labeled as aloof or difficult. They showed an artist chasing beauty as fiercely as he once chased fame. When Ritchie formed Rainbow in 1975, his listening habits shifted dramatically. One of the key records that inspired the band's creation was Rising by Rainbow itself. But before that, it was Houses of the Holy by Led Zeppelin that planted the seed. That album had everything: hard rock, melody, mysticism, Ritchie said. It reminded me that you could be heavy without being predictable. Songs like The Rain Song and No Quarter made him realize the power of atmosphere and tension, qualities that would later define Rainbow's majestic, almost cinematic sound. He was also listening heavily to In Rock by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. The virtuosity of Keith Emerson's keyboard work fascinated him. "They were classical musicians trapped in a rock band," Ritchie laughed. "That was me too." He admired how ELP merged symphonic grandeur with raw energy, an influence that would echo through Rainbow's Stargazer, one of the most ambitious hard rock songs ever written. But perhaps the biggest revelation came from an entirely different genre. Blackmore became obsessed with Renaissance and Baroque music, particularly albums like Music of the Middle Ages by David Monroe and the Early Music Consort of London. "That record changed everything," he once admitted. "The melodies, the instruments, the sense of drama. It was the most emotional music I'd ever heard." It was here that Ritchie found the spark that would later ignite Blackmore's night. Around the same time, he rediscovered his love for the blues through Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs by Derek and the Dominoes. Eric Clapton's vulnerability and tone struck him deeply. "It wasn't about showing off," Ritchie said. "It was about crying through the guitar." This album reminded him that soul mattered more than speed, a lesson he carried into his more melodic solos during Rainbow's later years. Then came the influence of Aqualung resurfacing, not for its rock, but for its storytelling. Ritchie admired how Ian Anderson used lyrics to weave folklore and moral struggle into music. "It wasn't just songs," he said. "It was poetry with guitars." That literary quality found its way into tracks like Catch the Rainbow and the Temple of the King, songs that sounded like myths, told through amplifiers. When he began composing more ethereal, spiritual material in the 1980s and 1990s, One particular record became almost sacred to him, Albinoni's Adagio in G minor. Though not a rock album, Ritchie often called it one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. It's sorrow and grace in one breath, he said. He even performed it live in instrumental form, translating its mournful strings into guitar phrasing, proof that classical composition lived in his blood as deeply as rock. As his musical tastes evolved, so did his definition of greatness. During the Blackmore's Night era, he revealed that Songs from the Wood by Jethro Tull was another pivotal album for him. It's mystical, romantic, earthy, and everything I love, he said. That's when I realized folk music could be as powerful as any rock anthem. It shaped the pastoral soundscapes and medieval textures of his later work, turning electric fury into acoustic serenity. Interestingly, even as he embraced acoustic and Renaissance influences, Ritchie still found inspiration in rock's next generation. He once mentioned being impressed by The Joshua Tree by U2. It had atmosphere, he noted. They understood space, when not to play. He admired the Edge's restraint and tone, saying it reminded him that silence could be as musical as noise. By the late 1990s, when Blackmore fully immersed himself in Blackmore's Night with Candice Night, his world had come full circle. The boy who once idolized Hank Marvin and Eric Clapton was now composing music that felt centuries older than rock itself. I don't listen to modern music much anymore, he admitted in one interview. But when I do, I look for honesty. It doesn't matter if it's played on a lute or a Stratocaster. In truth, the albums that inspired Ritchie in this era weren't just records. They were reflections of his evolving soul. From Zeppelin's mysticism to Munro's medieval tapestries, from Clapton's heartbreak to Tull's nature poetry, each one was a mirror, showing him who he truly was. I never stopped being a student, he once said quietly. I just changed teachers. But even now, as fans continue to debate his greatest riffs and performances, one question remains. Which albums, above all others, Ritchie Blackmore holds closest to his heart? And which one stands at number one? The single record that defined not just his sound, but his life. As Ritchie Blackmore sat in his countryside home, surrounded by old guitars and flickering candles, he reflected on the music that had shaped his long and unpredictable journey. At 80, his fingers might not move quite as fast, but his ear, sharp, discerning, and spiritual, remained as alive as ever. When asked to reveal his 10 favorite rock albums, he didn't hesitate. He smiled, took a deep breath, and said, "These are the ones that taught me something about life." Not just about playing. And so the list began, not as a collection of records, but as chapters of his own story. The first time I heard Hendrix, Ritchie said, I felt both inspired and terrified. Hendrix had turned the guitar into an orchestra of chaos and beauty. Songs like Purple Haze and The Wind Cries. Mary showed Ritchie that the guitar could be an emotional weapon. After that, he recalled, I stopped trying to play like anyone else. I started searching for my own voice. To Ritchie, Jeff Beck was more than a peer. He was a rival who kept him sharp. Jeff could make a note talk, he said. Beck Ola was a raw, aggressive masterpiece that perfectly captured controlled chaos. That album made me understand that feel matters more than flash. It's not about how fast you play. It's how deep each note cuts. Though it was his own album, Ritchie couldn't leave it off the list. That record was war, he said, laughing. We were fighting everyone, Zeppelin, Sabbath, even ourselves. Child in Time became one of his proudest moments, not just for its soaring power, but for its emotion. That's when we became Deep Purple, not just a band, but a monster. When Ritchie left Deep Purple to form Rainbow, he wanted freedom. Rising became the purest expression of his imagination. It was fantasy, myth, and fire, he said. With Ronnie James Dio's voice leading the charge, songs like Stargazer and Tarot Woman sounded like rock operas from another world. That album, Ritchie said, is the closest I've ever come to painting with sound. Few albums surprised him like Aqualung. Ian Anderson wrote songs that were like sermons, Ritchie explained. The mix of acoustic beauty and lyrical depth made him realize that rock could carry messages bigger than rebellion. That record taught me that a whisper can be louder than a scream. For Ritchie, Clapton's Layla was a lesson in heartbreak. "That's not a man playing guitar. That's a man bleeding," he said. He loved the imperfections, the cracked tones, the honest pain. It's not about perfection. It's about truth. That's what makes this album timeless. Though comparisons between Blackmore and Page were inevitable, Ritchie always respected Zeppelin's creativity. Jimmy wasn't the flashiest, but he had vision, he admitted. When the levee breaks especially fascinated him. That drum sound, it's thunder, it's primal, it's eternal. By the late 70s, Ritchie was moving toward folk music, and this album struck a deep chord. "It made me realize I could merge my love for medieval melodies with rock," he said. Songs from the Wood inspired the creation of Blackmore's Night, his later project blending electric and acoustic worlds. "It's an album that feels like walking through an ancient forest," he smiled. Most fans expected only rock albums, but Ritchie's heart had always belonged to the past. "This record reminded me why I play," he said. "It's not about distortion, it's about melody, about emotion." The haunting flutes and lutes became the seeds for his acoustic rebirth. It's proof that the old world still speaks. His final pick wasn't even rock. "This piece captures every emotion I've ever felt," Ritchie said quietly. "It's tragic, beautiful, and endless. I play it when I need to remember why music exists." When he finished listing the albums, Ritchie paused. "Music isn't about showing off," he said softly. "It's about saying something you can't say any other way." Each of these records, from Hendrix's wild genius to Albinoni's haunting beauty, shaped the man behind some of rock's most iconic riffs. Together they form the soundtrack of Ritchie Blackmore's life, a journey from fire to silence, from rebellion to peace. And as his fingers still glide across the strings with that unmistakable grace, one truth remains clear: Ritchie Blackmore never stopped chasing the perfect note. He simply learned that sometimes the quiet ones are the most powerful of all.